Thank you very much. I'm probably not going to need this microphone. I've got a very loud voice, but hopefully everyone will be able to hear me over the air conditioners. Thank you very much for the introduction. It's wonderful to not get my name overly minced up, and that was perfectly pronounced. So my name is Chris. Together with me today, I have one of my team members, Rachel. So starting as well, so just supporting the event. She's fairly new to the agency, so we're giving a bit of an introduction as we travel around. I'm going to talk to you today about the NDIS in general, a bit of an overview with some of our pathways to the process around access, planning conversations, and a bit of understanding about how the funds potentially operate. So before I start, I might just quickly ask around the room, so who in the room already has a knowledge of or some experience with the NDIA or the NDIS? So most people in the room? Who in the room have no idea what I'm talking about? Excellent. All right, we have a very mixed group. So for those of you that are new, I'm going to do my best to cover some information for you there to give you a bit of a good understanding. For those of you that might have already had a bit of an experience, I may end up recovering some things you already know, but I'm very hopeful that as part of that, I may be giving you some information that you may not have been aware of to begin with. A lot of material to cover, so I need to give you two disclaimers up front. So first of all, I have a tendency to talk very quickly, and I apologize for that. That's my little barrier to overcome. So if I am talking too fast, please let me know. So call out, wave your arms, throw something heavy at me. That will probably get my attention, and I'll try to slow things down. The second thing I need to do is make an apology up front that I know I have a very strange accent. Okay, and I know that's another barrier of mine. Now, I am actually born in a country town, from a country town down south called Nerrigan. Who knows Nerrigan? Anyone? Great. Then you know that everyone down there talks just like me. So that makes it easy. I am born in Nerrigan. I did grow up in the US. So I've got this middle of the road hangover accent. If you are struggling to understand anything I'm saying, again, let me know. I'll try to throw on an Aussie accent. It's really scary, but if it's going to work in the gig, I'm all for that. Okay, a couple of preface things just to let everyone know. The NDIA, in real terms as far as a federal agency, is still quite new. It has been going over east for going on to its 8th year now. In WA, really, it's been on the ground for about 3 years approximately. But in terms of federal agency sort of risk, that's still fairly young, still finding its feet. So the information, the way it operates, is under subject of a lot of change. So the information I'm giving you today is valid as of now. I will be talking about a couple of things that are soon to come into play as well. Most up-to-date information is always on our website or contacting one of our partners in community, which I'll talk about. Next bit, don't worry about reading it. Just two takeaways from this. First of all is that we normally do not authorize recordings of any sessions we do without prior consent. Unfortunately, we have prior consent, so we're good with that today. Also, as far as the information I'm presenting today, we're talking a bit more generically. Not going to be able to talk about specific case examples as well. Happy for questions to be raised, and clearly those questions could be very much related to something that you might be experiencing, but as far as one-to-one cases, we could look at organizing perhaps another opportunity to be able to have some conversation around those. If that's okay? Great. Moving forward. So, what is the NDIS? The NDIS stands for the National Disability Insurance Scheme. There's another term you hear about is the NDIA, and that stands for the National Disability Insurance Agency. The NDIA has one job in life, and that is to manage and administer the NDIS, the scheme itself. So I work for the NDIA. Participants, as we call them, people that come on board to get funding through the scheme, through the NDIS. However, they're quite interchangeable. So you often hear one or the other. They essentially mean the same thing. When we talk about the NDIS, we talk about a lifetime approach. Persons that come on board to the scheme will generally be in the scheme for life. That's when we talk about the concept of an insurance model. It is not intended as like your car insurance or your home insurance. Quite the opposite. It is actually an insurance approach in two regards. One, it's an approach to basically be able to be there for all Australians, whether they are born with or acquire a disability or impairment during their lifetime. So it is equally available to everyone, irrespective of social status, irrespective of any other sort of demographic whatsoever, equally available to all. It's also an insurance approach in trying to invest in people as early as possible to try to get the best possible outcomes to build their capacity so they have less of a need in later life. So those are the intentions behind the scheme. We talk about the scheme provides reasonable and necessary supports for people to help them have an average life. We will talk about what reasonable and necessary means. For those of you that have already aware of the NDIS and maybe already involved in that space, it may be a term you've heard a few times. We'll unwrap that a little bit more today. Essentially, though, it is designed to assist people to have an average life. The core of the scheme is to help people achieve their goals. You do not gain access or supports through the NDIS just because you may have a disability or impairment. We do not give you supports or funding or provide supports or funding just because you have an impairment or disability. We are providing supports and funding to help you achieve your goals, your dreams, your hopes, your aspirations, just in the same way that any other Australian might choose to do so. And that's something we're going to talk about during today's scheme and what that actually means. So it's about achieving your goals. We also, for those that do not potentially qualify for the scheme, we are expecting that we are going to have approximately 500,000 participants in the scheme. We are approaching that number now. It is not a capped amount that we're aiming for. We will have on board in the scheme however many need to be on board in the scheme. But that is roughly a figure we're expecting. For those that don't potentially come on board in the scheme, we expect there's about 4.8 million Australians that identify with disability or impairment in some way. And of those, many of them won't qualify for the NDIS. However, we are supporting through information, referrals, and linkages, and there are other avenues to be able to try to support people and to be able to meet their needs. It's also important to understand that the NDIS does not replace anything that's existing except for the previous state-based disability services. So it is a federal organization, and it's the actual world, it's a world first. It's the first national approach to supporting individuals with disability anywhere. So we literally have a lot of eyes of the world on us to see how this is progressing and to try to learn from our journey. We do have a bit of a saying in the agency, and I get in trouble when I tell these things. We do say sometimes that we're building the plane as we fly it. And to a certain degree it's true. And I mean that in the most respectful way. There isn't a guidebook to follow about what we're doing. There isn't a previous example somewhere to say, hey, go and learn from. There are little snippets around the world of things that are done in isolation, and yes, we do observe those, but in reality, we're making it happen for the first time. It is the largest social reform and change in Australia since Medicare. It's on an annual budget of over 22 billion, and that's looking at increasing. So we are talking a very significant program. It doesn't operate in isolation. We work together with other services and supports to do a holistic approach for an individual. So anything that is available in community, anything that's available through other mainstream supports like health, education, transport, other government agencies as well, we combine this into one to help a person achieve their goals. Whatever you're entitled to as a non-disability participant, non-NDIS participant, you're equally entitled to under the NDIS, and we actually take that into consideration to get all the systems trying to work together to give you the best possible outcomes. We put the individual, we see the person, everything we do, and we are part of a larger piece of infrastructure. Between the NDIS and what was previous, in the previous system, state-based systems, basically it was what we called block funding. So there was funding given by state and or federal government to a certain amount, and that funding was allocated to various providers or groups that qualified for it, and they were to use that funding to provide supports for individuals in need. The issue was, once that funding went out, that was it. That meant each provider had a limited amount of capacity for how many people they could take on board. So you had to find a provider that had capacity and to wait on board, or go onto a wait list until they had capacity to take you on board. If you were unhappy with that provider, you generally didn't have any choice, because either sometimes you were allocated who to go to, or you have nowhere else to go because everyone else's queues are full. And if you happen to be in rural, remote, and regional areas, even more challenging, because you may only have 1 or 2 providers to choose from, if any at all. Basically, it was decided what you received. You had little to no choice in that discussion. And then rationed, as I said, according to resources out as well. And there was funded directly to the provider, who then would deliver the service to the individual. It was discovered under the Productivity Commission review in 2011, and actually, a bit of information well back in around 2000, that if the states continued as they were, if we continued delivering services in the way we always have, that by 2051, it would take all of Australia's entire current gross domestic profit, all of our budget as a nation, just to deliver to disability, aged care, and community services alone. That's how much funding we would need if we continued on the trajectory we were. And we would need more than 3 times the number of people working in those sectors to provide those services and supports. The reality was that would not happen. We will not have that much funding available. We will not have that many people working those sectors. Therefore, the systems were unsustainable. Whether we liked it or not, there was a need for change. We knew that by 2032, we would be at crisis and unable to deliver on services where they were needed. And we were well and truly seeing the starts of that crisis before that. This is some of the drivers behind it. So the changes is the scheme now provides money directly to the individual. The monies are case by case, and the funding is, no, I say monies, let me retract that. Funding and supports are individually based. So providers that are out there do not get funded directly anymore. There's no more block funding. They only get funded when you decide to walk through their door and use their services. And you need to understand that if you do not like their service, you are very much entitled to walk straight back out that door. It is all about individual choice. And I cannot emphasize that enough. I realize it's not always that easy. I'm not trying to be idealistic about it, but what I'm saying is you have rights, and those are your rights. We determine the eligibility, so we have that process we're going to talk about today. The NDIA develops these plans for individuals based on a person's goals. And remember that word, I'm going to talk about it a lot. We approve those plans, and the participant has that choice of who they use, how they use, and how those plans get delivered. We call that choice and control, which we're going to talk about. There's a number of ways that this scheme is rolling out for those that can support. The agency itself is a key point of support. So we have our offices on the ground, we have our national 1-800 numbers as well, and online supports to support individuals through the process. Once they're on board with us, we have the planners, who will be also a contact or an ongoing contact for individuals. More specifically, we have what's called partners in the community. We have organizations on the ground that we've contracted with to be able to provide some data, some more on-ground and direct support. These are called providing a service of local area coordination, or LACs. So they're available to support individuals. For those persons that are under the age of 7, we have another pathway that's potentially available called early childhood, early intervention. And we have specific partners very skilled in that pathway and understanding to support those as well. You can find out who your local LAC's partners are by contacting our 1-800 number or visiting our website, but I've already got it here for you now. So if you're not familiar, these are organizations available in a number of areas, as you see on the screen, with APM, Mission Australia, and for the children, for those under 7 years of age, Wansley Early Learning and Development. Happy to talk more about that and refer you to more information. So just diving straight forward. Does anyone, actually I'm going to hide that slide. Does anyone in the room know you have to meet 3 of 4 criteria to qualify for the scheme? Does anyone in the room know what those criteria might be? I love a feedback audience. I might have to point people out. Someone said under 65? I heard that. Awesome. Yes. Tick 1.
No other source of funding. Can't be like an injury from workplace or something.
Oh, okay. Sort of. We'll talk about that. Sort of. But that's not a criteria that will gain or refuse entry. Thank you. Australian citizen, a permanent resident, or here under a protected special category visa. Great. That's 2 of 4, 2 of 3.5.
Permanency of the condition.
Permanency of a condition. So yes, we'll drag that out a little bit more. You need to have an impairment or disability that is profound, ongoing, and likely to be with you for life. So that permanency is quite important.
Double COVID vaccination.
Well, that's just about a criteria for everything these days. No, fortunately for the agency getting in, no, but it's one of the things we are encouraging. So well done, everyone. So there's a fourth criteria which I'll talk about. So you need to be under the age of 65 when you apply. You can apply up until your 65th birthday. Doesn't matter if your birthday passes. Once you lodge the application, it's from that point on that we are then doing the assessment. Once you turn 65, it's not as if you are no longer in the agency. You have the choice. So anyone who is already a participant, once they turn 65, can decide, do I want to stay in the NDIS or do I want to go over to my aged care? You'll have informed opportunities as to how you make that decision. In brief, really what you're going to be evaluating is, where's your bigger impact? Is your bigger impact disability related, or is your bigger impact aged care related? Because the NDIS doesn't provide aged care related supports. We provide disability related supports. So it's assessing at that time in life where the best fit might be for yourself. Under aged care, there are also some disability related supports that are available. But if you have a very extensive disability-related needs, perhaps NDIS might be the better pathway to remain in. Again, it's something you can decide at any time from 65 onwards. It's not as if you turn 65 and say, I need to make a decision today. Absolutely not. You need to be that permanent residency and citizenship. You need to have that profound disability that's ongoing and likely to be for life, or you need to meet what we call our early intervention requirements. So what is early intervention? Early intervention supports can be provided for eligible adults with disability or children with developmental delay. So if we talk about from the children's space, you don't necessarily have to have a diagnosis. Developmental delay is not a diagnosis, it's a formal diagnosis, and that can come from educators, from childcare supports and similar, that are identifying that an individual is not meeting the same developmental milestones and goals as those of similar age. So you can qualify for those early intervention. That's not formal or full-scale NDIS supports. It's about getting a range of concentrated early intervention therapies and various supports to help that individual, that child, start to hopefully overcome some of the developmental barriers and achieve similar milestones and goals as other children of the age do. Once you're turning around 7, the decision needs to be made or identified as to how that is progressing and whether there is now an established diagnosis. If at any age you have a diagnosis and meet the criteria, you potentially will be qualifying and going straight into the scheme in a larger concept. For young adults, any adults I should say, to be more correct, it's looking at where it can be identified that a potential disability or condition can benefit from having those intensive early range of supports, so they need less support throughout their lifetime. Early intervention is normally quite short term, so it's usually about 6 to 12 months, maybe a little bit longer depending on the situation. There are key criteria in the Act that talk about what that looks like and whether people will qualify. I need to make it clear though, early intervention is not rehabilitation. Those sort of therapies and those sort of support sits under the health space. Let's talk about access. So who here has gone through the access process? Okay, some people know. Who are looking at or maybe starting the access process? Okay. When you go through the access process, there's a few different ways. First of all, you want to look at how you enter that. There's a few different things you can do. You can go to our website. We have the access request form, an ARF, because we love our acronyms. So the ARF, you can download and start to progress through. It has a lot of information there now about what needs to be completed and how. There is the areas of evidence in there that will need to be completed by a treating clinician that knows your condition well. So GP, specialist, and similar. However, personal details, evidence about your disability, which is what you're going to be looking for, medical reports, any medical specialists or allied health professionals. Allied health professional reports are incredibly valuable, and I'll explain why in a moment. Basically, you're looking at quickly that information. And then once you have that information, you would be submitting the ARF to us. You can do that electronically. You can do that via mail, whatever is best suited. We also have another avenue. You can turn around and do what we call a verbal access request, a VAR. You contact our 1-800 number, and you do it yourself. You can do it. You can have, if it's for yourself or somebody else, you can have that assistance. All that needs to happen is you need to let us know, during that call, let's say I'm the one applying. I can turn around and say, hello, my name is Chris. I'm looking to apply for the NDIS. I have Rachel with me today, who would like to speak on my behalf, and I give her full consent to manage the process for me. And I can turn around and say, well, also, I consent for her to be the point of contact for this entire time. And that's important, because just because you give consent for someone to help you during that phone call, it could be just that phone call, or to talk on your behalf, we are still going to be reaching out to you as an individual if you're applying, according to your contact details, unless you've told us otherwise. So I've given Rachel consent to help me, but if I haven't said, give her my information and said my information through her, she will not get it. So if you've got, say, a medical team, hospital, doctor, someone else supporting you, and you want information, or social worker, and you want information going back to them, you need to give us that express consent at the outset. It can be done verbally. We don't just scratch a bit of a note that you sign. It doesn't have to be formal, but we do have also forms available on our website. We will then take you verbally through the access process. Ask all the questions, work it all out, and then we will send out to you a mostly completed access request form that just needs to have the evidence provided by your GP, which you attach and can send back. Does that make sense? So there's a few different ways you can go there as well. You can go to these partners I spoke about in the community, the LACs. They cannot complete the access request for you, but they can start to give you some guidance about what you need to do and help you along the journey. Let's talk about eligibility. So we have said you need to meet, back to these, three of those four criteria. So we're going to talk about that bit in orange, meeting the disability criteria and what that looks like. When this gets reviewed by what we call an access delegate, part of our national access team, they're going to step through a process in reviewing your application. And here's 5 of the steps they're going to look at as they go through that process. They're going to try to establish, first of all, is there a disability or impairments attributable to a diagnosed medical condition? Secondly, are the impairment or impairments likely to be permanent? Thirdly, are the impairments a result in a substantially reduced functional capacity? Fourth, do the impairment or impairments affect the person's capacity for social or economic participation? And last, does the person likely to require support under the NDIS for the person's lifetime or are best placed elsewhere? When we're reviewing this, when our delegates are reviewing this, they will step through A, B, C, D, E. If at any point it fails to meet a criteria, at that point the process stops. So if you are going through the process and it comes back to you saying not enough information or you failed to meet access, we will let you know why. And if we haven't let you know enough information, you can come back and ask, and we will give you more information. But it's important to understand that that's the point at which we have ceased the process. So let's say you have been unable to provide enough evidence to establish permanency of condition. And we will let you know. And you may go back to your GP or whoever it is to be able to get that additional evidence, but we haven't looked at anything beyond that. So the rest of the information in the application may also still be lacking information. So it's important to understand that. So when we talk about impairments, I have another bit of news flash for you. Your diagnosis doesn't really matter. And I don't mean that in a poor, negative way or disrespectful way. We are not admitting you based on your diagnosis. Don't listen. So actually, we don't even need to know what your diagnosis is. But we do need to know you have a diagnosis there. So why am I saying that? Let me make it very clear. Please, if you have a diagnosis, do let us know. It is very, very helpful. But ultimately what we're saying is what we're going to provide you in supports is not relevant to your diagnosis. And I'll talk about what that means in just a moment. Once you have that diagnosis, it needs to be a subject that is likely to be permanent with you for life. We're not asking for someone with a crystal ball to say you will have condition A, B, C forever. but based on their best clinical judgment and evidence to date, this condition is likely to be permanent. That's all we need to know. We do not need long documents defining why. We just need your clinician to tell us, in their clinical view, for these key reasons, this is likely to be permanent. Impairment results in a substantially reduced functional capacity. Let's have some fun with that. What does that mean? The standard that we apply for substantially reduced capacity is described in Section 24 of our Act. Oh, does anyone know that there is an NDIS Act? Oh, see, we're getting exciting stuff now. Everything we talk about today is defined in the Act. So if you want to know more information, best place to go is to download the NDIS Act. Awesome. Who in the room are insomniacs? You're loving it. You'll be out like a light in 5 minutes. It is just awesome. It is a lot of information there. It is quite involved. And yes, it is a bit of a heavy read. However, everything we talk about, what we act, the way we make decisions, is fully set out in the Act that we have to follow and the guidelines associated. In that Act, it says that people have to have substantially reduced capacity in at least of extremely high levels, and requires that to be in at least one of what we call the 6 life domains and impact their ability to do day-to-day activities. The 6 life domains: communication, mobility, social interaction, self-education, self-management, self-care. And we can talk a bit about more of those a bit later if you'd like. But you need to demonstrate that you have substantially reduced capacity in at least one of those areas. Now, the next question is, of course, well, that's a subjective term, substantially reduced. You know, how do you find out? How is it done fairly? Look, we determine the difference between reduced and substantially reduced by focusing on the everyday functioning within these areas. So for a reduction to be considered substantial within one of those, it's an inability to effectively function within the whole or the majority of that area, not just a singular activity. A person will be considered unable to participate effectively or completely in an activity if they cannot safely complete one or more of the tasks required to participate in an acceptable period of time. Just because you do something more slowly or differently to somebody else doesn't mean you have substantially reduced functional capacity. It's more about an inability. So let's talk about it a bit more. If you have difficulty in reading or writing, that's not considered a substantially reduced capacity in the education and learning domain. If you have an inability to learn and retain skills and pick up new concepts, short-term memory issues where you just do not retain that information, that is what we're now talking about, substantially reduced capacity in the learning domain. There is a difference. It's not about your knowledge, it's about your ability to obtain and retain, for instance, knowledge and use and apply that knowledge. This is where we're trying to identify. Communication, similar. Speaking more slowly or speaking with some difficulty does not necessarily constitute substantially reduced capacity in communication. And also, even difficulty to speak, depending on the situation, may not always qualify, though it's usually a significant factor. There are multiple modes of communication, and it's really looking at what that potentially looks like from a holistic perspective. So it's not just tick one box, and this is important to understand. The NDIS approach is not a tick a box approach. There is no one size fits all. So I'll give you a bit of a quick example. I like to talk about Gary. Gary's good fun. Gary is part of a chess club. And look, very often he gets asked to leave because Gary's a sore loser. So he struggles. If he's not winning or he's not doing well, he can sometimes get aggressive, particularly verbally aggressive, and get very, very emotional. So he's not always meeting the norms and rules of that group, and sometimes gets asked to leave the chess club. So, social structure is a bit of a challenge for him, so he can get quite verbal when things he just doesn't understand seem to happen. He's also part of a walking group, and that works quite well for him. He's able to join with that group, and when he's having a good day and feeling quite chatty, he chats with everyone on the team. When he's feeling less so, he can walk on his own and do his own thing. He's got a few friends, catches up with them occasionally for coffees, lunches, sometimes the occasional dinner. He's able to go and do his own shopping, but he will generally do that when it's quieter, because he does prefer his own company a bit more and does it a bit more on his own. So do we think that Gary meets criteria of substantially reduced functional capacity, as we might refer to it under our social interaction domain? What are the thoughts in the room? Who says he does? And who says he doesn't? Okay. For those that say he does, any particular reasons coming to mind why you think he does?
Inability to function in his activity of chess.
So his activity of chess. So when we define from an NDIS perspective, we're now talking about the domain of social interaction. So we say he has to have substantially reduced capacity across the majority of that domain. Does playing chess represent the majority of an ability to socially interact?
What scary seconds on this is the often issues of social structure.
Correct. Correct. So social structure. So we would then need to unpack what that looks like and say, well, where is that focused? We know he's part of a walking group and does that quite effectively. We know he can shop and do that quite effectively, so he prefers to do it on his own. We know he has friends and he's maintained long-term relationships and friendships, but clearly just a very small circle of friends. So there is some discussion and further evidence to be unpacked there, but we would deem that as not being substantially reduced. He still has his abilities to socialize, just in his way of doing so. He still has the ability to engage in some activities. Other activities don't seem to work so well for him. He still has the ability to do his day-to-day tasks. So there's a question.
Yeah, what if, like say the second one's caused by a medication, what if it was on Keppra and he's verbally aggressive?
It's a really good question. Basically, the NDIS is focused on something that's disability or impairment related. So when we look at substance abuse, medication, and similar, that sits under the jurisdiction of health. That's health treatments, medications, and similar. The NDIS doesn't have any responsibility. That is strictly a health responsibility. So the outcomes or what might be happening as a result of that treatment is something that has to be managed in the health service and health space. But that actually leads me to another good point, and thank you for the question. Just to make one other thing, I suppose, as hopefully as clear as possible. When the NDIS before the NDIS came into existence, all the various federal, state, and government services got together. It's called the Coalition of Australian Governments, to decide who has responsibilities for what. And health came to the table and says, this is our domain, and people needing treatments, people needing assessments, people needing medication, and similar sits with us. And mental health talked about their domain, education, transport. All the different groups came up and said, these are our areas of responsibility. The NDIS came into existence after that. And so we were looking at the areas outside of what they were taking on board as far as dealing with people with disability for what the NDIS would support. So those rules were invented and decided before the agency came into existence. So the reasons behind different areas or NDIS having or not having responsibility for things was actually something the NDIS didn't have a say in. It was mandated to us, here's what's going to be yours. Having said that, it is legislation, and legislation has to be changed, but we also have a mechanism for understanding that, hey, that's not always perfect. Now we are years and years on and things change, new things come to light. We didn't consider everything at the time. So there is what we call a Disability Reform Council that gets together to assess, hey, what has been missed, and I'll talk about what some of those changes have been a little bit later. But medication, though, is one that sits firmly under health, anything related to it.
But isn't there a problem? I mean, if that person cannot live healthily without that medication, and it does cause these side effects, shouldn't the NDIS be helping?
If that medication is causing the side effects, it is health department has accepted responsibility that they need to get that right. We don't have clinicians. We don't have those services. Those services sit strictly under health. Medical-related issues and medication-related issues is strictly under health. We don't have the knowledge, ability, or jurisdiction to make any judgment call on that. That is.
So the NDIS would rather than have a medical problem than to have the medication and have the side effect.
Not at all. We are unable to have, we don't have the say in that area. It is strictly under a health department mandate. We don't have the say or the choice. It is totally the health responsibility to manage everything around an individual's health and how that progresses. And if there's issues, it's important to be able to work with the clinicians to be able to unpack what those issues are. We provide funding to support individuals. We don't have the infrastructure of people that provide that sort of support. So we do not have doctors, we do not have clinicians and clinical staff on board that are able to even guide in that space.
considered health from University City NDIS because they overlap.
Let's take us back to where we were before. That's a brilliant question. And it wasn't something I was going to talk about today, so I thought we were on a different subject, but hey, it does apply. The same principles apply. So with mental health, we all have mental health. So this is important first and foremost to understand. We all have our good days and bad days, and most of us are fortunate enough that we can cope and manage with that. Those that perhaps start to struggle more and more, it becomes looking at a case of where that sits. So mental health, for the majority, is similarly a mental health area responsibility. The management and treatment still sits primarily under mental health. Where the NDIS comes to play is if it's established that that condition or impairment meets those criteria of A, it is a diagnosis, B, it is likely to be permanent. So turning around and saying, well, a person has, I'm trying to sort of think of some more transient disorders, it's a bit hard to say. Perhaps not a best example, but perhaps an eating disorder. And those may be lifelong. In many instances, they are treatable, and people can come out of it. So until it's established that it's going to be lifelong, you don't meet the criteria of permanency. The third element, though, is what is the impact? So you may have a medical condition, and it may be lifelong, but if the impact is very small and doesn't really affect your day-to-day, then you're not likely to qualify for the NDIS. Anxiety maybe is a good example, and people have varying degrees of it. Many people will cope with anxiety for their entire life, but they do cope with it, and they can have supports that help them cope with that. That would not likely meet the criteria of substantially reduced capacity, because it does not necessarily impair their ability across large domains of day-to-day tasks. But it can do on occasion, and again, it's looking at to what extent and how often. Does that help a bit? They overlap. Look, there is some gray area, but primarily, if it comes to treatment and primary support, that does all sit under health. Yes?
I was just wondering how all this information gets out to the general population, like the kids in schools, and do you see our community health service or health department, all this is coming to all schools?
There are several things within schools. It's something that we are currently undertaking. My team, I didn't introduce. I am part of the community engagement and communications team, and our responsibility is about getting information out to the community, getting feedback as well, and understand how that works. We work together with these partners I mentioned, Mission Australia, APM, to be able to disseminate this information, working together with the different systems, health, education as well, to try to get information out there. For example, I was just noticing out here today, CalParent is a group that works out of the Children's Hospital, and they actually produce their own NDIS support information to support their members. And that's one of the avenues that we support and work with. We're not going ourselves directly into the schools, but we're working with the education department to make sure teachers, staff, and people have that awareness and knowledge and can hopefully identify situations where there's opportunities there to provide more information. And where requested, like today, there's opportunities for members from my team or from the partners to come and talk a bit more about the NDIS and present information.
The health department nurses work in schools every day. So like if somebody asks a question or wants information, straight into their system every day.
That is a bit of a work in progress. So again, as I said in WA, we're at the start of this journey. We're literally only starting our work with the health departments and similar in that context. So that is where we're heading. That's where we're trying to get to. But their systems are different to ours. So what they do is they would be referring them to information and guiding them as to maybe how to do an access and can support that. But their systems and our systems are very, very separate.
I guess it's been made very clear that epilepsy is medical, belongs to medical field, whatever. Yeah. But obviously the implications come along with that, delays and stuff. So I guess my question is, it is day-to-day struggles for kids and families. Why can't they, unless they get another diagnosis on top of the epilepsy, which is huge in itself, why can't that be enough for them to get help and families to get help through the NDIS?
Potentially it can be.
Another diagnosis on top.
Potentially it can be.
I was told it wasn't, epilepsy wasn't accepted on its own.
Well, I will put one thing very, very clear. No diagnosis is accepted on its own. You do not get access to the NDIS based on your diagnosis. It will not get you through the door. Doesn't matter what it is. What will get you through the door, sorry?
We went through one's lead and that's what I was told. Epilepsy on its own, even with all these delays.
Epilepsy on its own or any other diagnosis is not enough. It is the impact of that condition that the agency will assess. It's the functional impact that we look at. To talk to that example very quickly, and I'll get on because I'll unpack a bit more about then how that unfolds. Let me put it this way. From an agency perspective, I'll move epilepsy to the side just for a moment, no disrespect. Let's say we have two people that present with autism level 2. We know those as significant diagnosis. The impacts that has on them, though, could be completely different and where it affects them. But more to the point, from an agency perspective, we're not to be able to work out, well, what do they need? We're waiting to find out what is actually important to them. What are their goals? What are they trying to achieve? Depending on how their impacts affect them in their life, in their community, and what they want to do. Based on that, we can then determine their eligibility and what supports we are best placed to provide. So we are not there to treat their conditions. We are not there to rehabilitate their conditions. We are there to help them overcome the barriers that those conditions cause to them achieving what they want to do in the same way anybody else would. So you have to have a goal. It has to be disability related, but your disability has to create an impact that affects your ability significantly to do day-to-day tasks. So epilepsy on its own it's the impact of epilepsy, and at the impact, we have the assessments, and we have the functional assessment, particularly from an OT, that demonstrates, due to the severity of this condition, and due to the fact that there is not sufficient treatment available to help manage it, this person's day-to-day is significantly impacted. And that person would potentially and should potentially qualify for the NDIS. It is looking at the level of impact. So what we look at also is the primary at this point. If a person has multiple disabilities, the primary impact, and whichever one is affecting the most, to look at their eligibility. Once we have them through the door, so to speak, we can then unpack the range of things that are going on there and the additional supports they need. So I'm just being mindful, I'm being told we're almost at the end of time and I'm only about a small way through.
We're actually.
Oh, we're on time? We're over time. Ooh. Okay. So I'm being told in no uncertain terms. What I will quickly do in that case, as I'm wrapping up, I'm going to get through to one or two maybe sort of important things that might be relevant. Just important to understand that once you have an access to met decision, you're going to have a planning conversation. You want to go to the planning conversation, prepare with a lot of information. The best way to do that is to get our booklet too. It's available online. It's going to take you through most of the questions that we're going to ask and allows you to actually fill out the answers in advance. So you're going to have a really good idea of what you're going into, and we're going to have a good idea of what that needs to look like as well. It's a great support. Please make sure you do, but start to work out what your goals are. And this is the other thing, please understand. The NDIS, you can't come to us, if you should come to a planning meeting and saying, right, I need this, and I need this, and I need 5 of that, and this is what I'm going to need to manage my life, the answer is going to probably be no. Because we're not there to provide tick a box and NDIS will provide a support. What we will do is provide you with supports that you might need day to day. If you have a goal that you want to live more independently, you have a goal that you might want to be able to get a job, you have a goal that you want to acquire certain skills or abilities, then we will turn around and say, that sounds like a valid goal. What do we need to do to get you there? Are you going to need therapy? Are you going to need assistive technology? Are you going to need home modifications? So coming to us and say, I need my bathroom modified, we're going to say no. You're going to say, I need to live independently in my own home. In order to do so, I'm going to need some modifications. And we'll say, great, let's talk about what they are.
Chris, out of interest, on your introduction, it's not status-based. Why do they need bank account details?
Depending on how you choose to manage your funds and support. So if you want to be self-managed, we need to be able to make payments into your bank account so you can pay those services. The last thing I will talk about before I leave is, I think, very important to talk about what will we support and what won't we support. We'll support aids such as wheelchairs, hearing aids, and adjustable beds, items such as prosthetics and artificial limbs, but not the surgery or the treatments involved. Home modifications, personal care, domestic assistance, things that assist people potentially exiting the health system to live independently. And therapies require a result of a person's impairment, including physio, speech, and occupational therapy. Again, they're not the treatments or rehabilitation. What we will not fund: clinical services and treatments of health conditions, including mental health, all medical services such as GPs, hospital care, surgery, and rehabilitation, the cost of specialists and those associated medical costs. Medications and pharmaceuticals, per that earlier questions, do not come under the NDIS. What we call subacute services, palliative care, geriatric care, psychogeriatric care, also sit under health. Post-acute care, including nursing care for treating health conditions, wound management, or treatment of injuries, also is under health, not under the NDIS. Dental care and all dental treatments, medical and clinical services. The last thing I will give you before I walk out the door, as much as I'm being pushed out the door. Oh, where did it go? Ah, that's what I wanted. These are some of the other things that were traditionally under health previously, but now get treated under the NDIS. And I put this slide up, there's a specific reference there to epilepsy. So we talk, for instance, there about training to implement the participants' epilepsy management plan and emergency medication management plans and similar. So there are certain things specifically recognized that previously were the responsibility of health to deliver, but now you can get funding through the NDIS. And that's important to understand. That is funding through the NDIS to implement that. That's not, we have a person that will come out and do that. It's being able to enable that to happen and provide funding for the right therapist or right individuals to be engaged to do so for you.